inauguration of the new president in South Korea comes at a time when managing ties with the United States is more crucial than ever. For more on how the new government will engage with the White House, we have Dr. Stephen Noerper, the president of Asia Dialogue this morning. Dr. Noerper, thank you for joining us.
Good morning. My pleasure.
Morning. So what do you think will be the most notable difference in President Lee Jae-myung's approach to handling relations with Washington compared to the former Yoon administration?
Well, this is a tough task for any president, and certainly for President Lee, this will be really an uphill battle to try to get Trump to the table in a friendly way. The prospect of what the new administration is inheriting relative to the threat of very significant tariffs, very much the lifeblood in terms of not only cars and steel, but other aspects of Korean exports as well. So getting that right will be very hard for the Lee administration. And the prospect of it not going right means that it bears a certain economic threat to Korea. So it's more intense even than what President Yoon had faced. Of course, also, we don't know where things like the relationship between South Korea and the United States, as well as the trilateral relationship among the United States, South Korea, and Japan will go. Those were more priorities during the administration of Yoon. And President Lee has indicated that he is kindly disposed to trying to improve relations with China. So that will be an area of fine balance. And also, of course, the concern that perhaps President Trump will approach North Korean leader Kim in a way that would not be in the interest of South Korea. All challenges.
Right, and in their first phone call, you mentioned a lot of challenges there. The two presidents said in their first phone call that they will work towards a swift tariff deal. How do you think the new government should handle trade tensions? Do you believe the two sides will be able to reach an agreement by July?
Well, I think July would be rather fast. There hasn't been a lot of progress despite President Trump's commitment to try to see deals done quickly by any nation. And so President Yi has allowed a bit of wiggle room there by requesting an extension, given the fact that the administration has just gone into play. And so chances are it will be longer. It also will be determined, as your report indicated, by whether issues like U.S. troop presence are on the table, as well as things like imports of American beef. So this could end up being a much longer negotiation over the current state of U.S.-ROK relations. That could be troubling and at times difficult for South Korean negotiators.
Right, and President Yi will be visiting Canada for the G7 summit, where he's likely to meet Trump for the first time. What topics do you expect will be discussed there in Canada?
Well, that's really a very critical meeting, both President Yi's attendance at the G7, potentially his attendance at NATO, if that's possible, because those would both allow opportunities for sidebars with the Americans. And so it will be very critical for President Yi to strike up a personal rapport with President Trump quickly. He seems to operate on personal relationships. And so the opportunity there will be to establish that through personal and warm feelings, and then to move beyond that into a host of, as we've described, very difficult issues ahead for South Korea and the United States. But the presence there will be really important. And it's important, too, that it is in Canada, which, too, has its own concerns about President Trump. And remember, there will be other major economies there. So it is very good that President Yi will be there to represent Korean interests among the top economic powers globally.
Right, and like you mentioned, another key challenge the new government faces is the potential reduction of the number of U.S. troops in Korea and the costs related to those U.S. soldiers here. How do you think the Yi administration should address these issues?
Well, it's a difficult and, again, uphill battle because President Trump is the first U.S. president to really not have a personal moral stance toward the importance of the South Korean relationship. For 70 plus years, the United States and Korea were joined in blood and, of course, by a very close relationship that saw the development of South Korea's economy, as well as eventually the shift to South Korean democracy. And President Trump does not necessarily feel attached to that. He does seem to also enjoy his personal rapport with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He made that a point of remembrance of his first administration, despite the breakdown of talks between the North Korean and U.S. leaders in Hanoi. So trying to get the Americans on board to continue the current levels will be a challenge. There are many in the senior administration of Donald Trump who feel that reorienting toward China should be the priority, maybe so much as to take some troops off the Korean Peninsula and orient them in that regard. And there may be demands on South Korea that it orients itself towards China, which is an extremely difficult process and prospect, considering that China is the #1 economic partner for South Korea. So it will behoove South Korea to really emphasize to the Americans the importance of what they see as the relationship, where troops fit in, the indispensable nature of South Korea's contribution, not just in terms of joining together on global issues or security globally and regionally, but also in terms of the economic prospects that it provides and things like investment in the U.S. That will all be part and parcel of how Trump views this issue of troops. And of course, it will depend, too, on what South Korea feels about the persistence of U.S. troops in the numbers that they are right now, roughly 28,500, perhaps more, with rotations in and out, or how they would like to see U.S. forward deployment. But the real crux is in trying to define a threat vis-a-vis China for the Americans. That may not be a threat that is overtly shared by South Korea, and President Lee, as a candidate, has indicated as such. Also, the point on North Korea. So how they engage North Korea, and for Washington to do that in coordination with Seoul, will be a South Korean priority.
All right, and speaking of China, while the White House says South Korea's election was fair, it also said it remains concerned about Chinese interference. What's your take on this?
Well, the hint was perhaps there was some Chinese cyber or other interference. We probably won't know publicly what was intended by that. There may also have been allusion to the fact that President Yi did seem to have more favorable positions relative to re-engaging China. And perhaps on the progress in talks, or at least revisiting talks with the North Koreans. That may have been part of what the White House was signaling, but we won't know for certain. What is important, though, is that we get the United States and South Korea back in an engaged, constructive, fruitful relationship, and that if it comes to things like negotiations with the North Korea, that we use the good offices of the United Nations and others who can help those two move forward. Also, the disposition of Russia towards North Korea now, and of course China, where it sits relative to what is no doubt some concern about the uptick in the Russia-North Korea relationship, may provide an opportunity for both South Korea and the United States to deal with China and promote more responsible Chinese behavior and Chinese leadership in the area. All of those concerns for both administrations, perhaps that will bring them together. And oddly, it's worth pointing out that historically the progressive South Korean presidents and conservative U.S. presidents tend to get along fairly well. Certainly we saw that with President Moon and President Trump in the first administration of Trump. So let us hope that there's some smooth going, but it is an upward challenge for the administration of President Yi relative to what we know is the very difficult nature of the Trump administration. And South Korea ultimately has seen democracy win out after a confusing 6 months. And of course, we see now in the United States democracy under certain level of challenges, as your report on what's happening in Los Angeles will indicate. So trying to emphasize the importance of democracy, economic, and security partnership between South Korea and the United States is very, very critical at this time.
Right, we'll have to see how it goes. Dr. Noerper, thank you so much for your insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Aloha. Wonderful to see you.